Welcome to the SpiritWoke Podcast, podcasting from the beautiful city of Stillwater, the birthplace of Minnesota. Are you going through a spiritual awakening? Do you wish to learn more about continued spiritual growth and want to meet others who are on a similar journey? We hope that this podcast and its community can be a meaningful resource for you. The SpiritWoke Podcast welcomes special guests from around the globe who share personal stories of their awakening journey, along with details of spiritual abilities they've developed along the way. So buckle up and get ready for this exciting episode. And now, here's your host, Adam Dins.
Friends, welcome back to the SpiritWoke Podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about such a fun conversation. We're going to be talking about surrender and manifestation with our good friend, Ann Jarvis. Believe it or not, this is Ann's fifth time back with us here at the SpiritWoke Podcast. And in fact, Ann was our first ever guest on the podcast way back in March. And it just so happens that she is going to be our first guest as you're listening to this in 2020. So really excited to have Ann back. A little bit about Ann. Ann is a seasoned intuitive energy healer and holistic nutritionist. In addition to that, Ann is a seer that loves working with and teaching others how to access the blueprints of their soul. Ann resides in Ottawa, Ontario with her husband and their young daughter. If you haven't listened to any of Ann's previous podcasts, go to spiritwoke.com and just search for Ann Jarvis and you will find all of them. She's talked to us about spirit guides, the blueprints of our soul. She's channeled the 7 rays of the sun. And I'm trying to remember what the fourth one was. But all of them are there. You have to go check them out. They were fun. All of them are top-notch episodes. And before we kick the conversation off tonight, I wanted to share with you that there is a SpiritWoke release, a guided meditation album. Go check it out. It's on spiritwoke.com. You can click on the meditation link in the top nav, or it's just spiritwoke.com/meditations. And you can check them out. They're all guided meditations. They're all guided healing meditations, and they're for you. So definitely, when you get a moment, take a look at those. So with that being said, Ann, I wanted to welcome you back to the SpiritWoke Podcast.
Thank you, Adam. I'm so excited to be here as usual.
Excited to have you back. And I'm sure for those dedicated SpiritWoke listeners, they're excited to have you back as well. You've definitely been someone that I've heard from the community. They've really enjoyed your episodes. So it's always good to have you back.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice to know.
Absolutely. And, today we're talking about, as I mentioned earlier, a really cool topic, which is surrender and manifestation. And, for me, surrender is one of those topics that I've always, I shouldn't say always been interested in, but I've been interested in since sort of going through this awakening process. And in fact, Ann, you're one of the first people in this community that I did meet. And that was the first thing I learned about spirituality from the community was from you on surrender. And I know I've shared this with you, but for those listening in, there was and I don't have it on me, so I can't read it, but it was a beautiful tweet that you shared about surrender, and I printed it out and I kept it in my office, and I looked at it every day when I came in, and it was really inspiring. And I think it's something that is easy. Surrender is something that gets easily lost as a mindset, I think, sometimes in the spiritual community.
Yeah, I think so too, because I think, ego rides just as high in the spiritual community as it does in all other communities. And, so I think, we want to be special in the spiritual community, and we want to have these cool abilities. And, there's nothing wrong with that. I want that too. And, I love when I stumble upon, some new knowledge. But surrender is just so different from, anything knowledge-based or talent-based or, ability-based. So, while we might look around and say, oh, this person is a great, medium. They can speak with deceased people. And, I love speaking with mediums. I think they're great. I've got a handful of my favorites. But surrender is just in a whole different realm from anything, ability or talent based. And I learned that several years ago, of course, not meaning to learn it, but I learned it and through an experience that I had. And of course, when, and you and I have talked about this, Adam, that we think perhaps that when we have an experience of surrender, of course, we can't make that happen because in surrender, we're not making anything happen. However, when it happens, it changes you. I mean, it really changed me. It changed all of my perspectives on certainly, the spiritual path, even just the human path. And so since that first experience, it's just been something I've been, moving closer and closer and closer to. And it's something I talk about a lot. And anytime I talk about it, people love it because it's it feels so relieving for people, right? To know that perhaps we don't have to work as hard here as we think we do.
I definitely want to get into that tonight as well. And it, I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name who wrote The Untethered Soul.
Michael Singer.
Michael Singer. So Michael Singer, he wrote another book. It's his autobiography. And
yes.
Have you read that book?
Yes, I love that book.
It's an amazing book, and his story basically is how he went from just kind of being a hippie, living in a van, right? Right after college or during college and after, and he eventually became the CEO of a company related to WebMD, became a multi-millionaire over again. And his whole story was the fact that he didn't try, like he surrendered in a way. And that was one of his, and what he, throughout the book, as you recall, one of the things that the primary thing that he said he was surrendering to was to his likes and dislikes. He's like, I'm just not going to have any likes and dislikes, and I'm just going to follow my path as it is presented to me. And if it's something I don't think I'm going to like, I'm just going to surrender to it and ignore it. And through that path of surrendering, he found himself so successful, but it's almost like a supernatural type of surrender that he was doing. Like, wow, that takes a lot of gusto to be able to be that committed and dedicated to the art of surrender.
Yeah, I know it was, and what really captured me about his story, and it's the one thing that I keep coming back to because I keep thinking, should I be doing more of this? But he just said yes to everything, right? So everything that came his way, as you said, Adam, whether he thought it was, whether his mind told him this was a good idea or not. And often his mind would say, this isn't going to work. I don't know about this, or, whatever. If the opportunity presented itself, he said yes to it. And that was sort of his commitment, that he wasn't going to turn away from from how life, came to him. And, this is sort of like on a really large, grand scale, what, the path of surrender is all about. And, it reminds us that life will come to us, and life will happen to us and for us. And it's going to go there anyway. It's whether or not we're resisting it or we're allowing it. That's really the surrendered path. Byron Katie, who is a, an awake person who came up with this beautiful sort of therapeutic method called the work. One of my favorite quotes in the world is a Byron Katie quote, and it goes something like, let life have you, because it does anyway. It's just so give yourself over. Life is going to have its way with us. If we look back on our lives and we look at the times that we've said, I see life is going in one direction, but I'm really going to try and crank the steering wheel and, go over in this direction because it's, this other direction maybe feels scary or unknown or uncomfortable in some way. And, when we try and force the steering wheel over, when we can look back, that usually doesn't go so well. So, one of the things I've come to realize is surrender is really a practice of the spiritually maturing. It's like the maturation process of the spiritual soul, because at some point when you feel like, as you and I talked about earlier a minute ago, when you feel like perhaps you've mastered the talents, you've met the goals, you've checked the boxes, and you start to realize that some of our greater joys don't in fact come from the material world, like we are marketed it does, like we even believe in some of the new age circles that it does, the entire, which I know we're going to get to, but the entire manifestation movement, which is often really cloaked with look what you can achieve materially, which is just right. It's just such a head scratcher, for so many of us. We start to realize that our greatest joys can't really come from outside of us. And so when we start to realize that, we realize that if we can just meet that thing that is already inside every single one of us, that thing that is, really what we are, which is this, these eternal souls that are not at all separate from, what some of us might call God or the divine or the universe or life or source. We're not separate from that. And so turning towards that rather than away from that and trying to convince ourselves that we know better, we've got this, my idea is better than the universe's idea for my life, which, as you start to really wake up, you realize it's absolute craziness. It's just craziness. And so when we can start to move towards or, fall into or merge with that eternal part of us that is just always here. It's always silent. It's that watcher, right? It's the silent witness within us. When we start to sort of fall softly into that space, that becomes a real game changer. And, I've often heard people say, or muse about, well, if we're just falling into this, if we're just surrendering to this, then, what about goals? What about, do I just do nothing with my life? And of course, that's insane. Of course not. Where do we think our greatest inspirations come from? They come from that silent, eternal space within us. So when we make really good friends with that space, I think life can become the most interesting that we could imagine.
Yeah. That's powerful. And I do want to come back to that thought in a minute on manifestation and sort of that thought of surrender, and because I have a couple things that I want to ask you about on that as well. But yeah, we will get to that here momentarily. But with that being said, how do we, and maybe you alluded to this already, but how do we get to a place, because we've talked about surrender, and I feel like surrender is as a concept, surrender sounds great, right? Like, of course I want to surrender. I don't want to do this on my own, right? Like, of course I want the universe's help, not even the universe's help, but I'm just open to life. I want life to guide me. I don't want to be the one trying to control it all. So yeah, I want to surrender. But how do we get? I feel like there's a place where maybe our egos want to surrender because we feel it's a spiritual thing to do, and I know, like, oftentimes I've said in my life, I can't do this anymore on my own, and I surrender it all to you. But then I pick it back up. And, maybe I surrender for an hour or however long it is. And then I go about my business as usual. And so how does one know when they're truly ready to surrender?
I think maybe it's not even a knowing. I think, we've all had those moments in our lives where the load we're carrying, and of course that's going to look different for everyone, right? If you're a highly sensitive person, that load might not feel that much to someone who's not so sensitive, let's say. So, but it's so individual. But I think when we get to a point where we have a realization that we simply cannot go on carrying a particular situation, challenge, life on our own anymore. And, it's like you hit a wall. And, I was having breakfast with a friend a couple of weeks ago, and she said to me, I found myself one night praying to a God that I didn't believe in. And I sort of laughed and I said, but clearly you do. Clearly you do. And, we've heard that same story from so many people, whether you believe, whether you were taught to believe, whether you were taught to not believe, or, whether you're an atheist, or it doesn't matter. We will all hit a spot in our lives where we, of our own accord, can do no more. We can do no more. We hit a wall. And when we hit that wall, surrender may or may not walk in. And, I've had some incredible, mystical, I guess, experiences in my life. I was in a group meditation. This was about maybe 14 or 15 years ago, and there were about 200 people of us there in the room. And I forget what my wall was about at that time, and I forget why I had hit it, but I had completely hit this wall. And so I went to this, I went to Arizona, and I was with some friends, but we were in a room with 200 people. And the teacher said, "Okay, everyone, get really quiet. We're gonna end with a meditation." And I was feeling just almost enraged. I don't even know what was going on, but it wasn't good. And just before, everyone just sort of started, steadying themselves in their seats, this voice spoke to me and said, "Go and lie down." And that was odd for me because I always meditated, sitting up in a chair, but I wasn't going to ignore the voice. So I went and I laid down, and I couldn't tell you even how the meditation began. But the next thing I knew, my entire body was shaking uncontrollably. And I remembered thinking, if someone were looking down on me, they would think I was having, like a pretty significant epileptic seizure. And followed by that, everything went completely silent. And I remembered this silence was like a silence I'd never experienced before. And it was like the silence itself was overwhelming. And, to try and put words to something that, like this is so difficult, but essentially I was held, or held by really what I would say was God, source. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, and I knew, and I was absolutely awestruck. And I could see in myself that I was completely held by this source, and that the holding was completely unconditional. I didn't have to be anything in particular. I didn't have to agree with anything in particular. I didn't have to exist in any way in particular for me to be okay to source, God. And that experience, when something like that happens, it really, really changes you. And, one of the things that I came away with from that experience is we, of course, are indivisible from this source. We cannot be separate. That's like saying, the bark is separate from the tree, or the limb, is separate from the tree. It's impossible. Even if you sever it, even if you, take a piece of bark off, it is forever, connected energetically, biologically to its source, which is the tree. And so I think when we start to accept or realize that we are indivisible from our source, it becomes a lot easier to, when we do hit that wall, as we were talking about earlier, your question was, how do you know? How do you know when to go there? I think there needs to be a knowing or realization that we are not separate, that we are of that source, and that source is always right there, and it's not in a different location. It is who we are. It is what we are. It's in every cell of our body. And when we can accept that, and when we can know sort of the brilliance of this source, it becomes really, really easy to let go and surrender.
That's powerful. I want to ask you something about that, and this is probably a hybrid question in between surrender, and it probably also has a little bit to do with manifestation, but we can apply it, at least for now, to surrender, and we can apply it later to manifestation. But my question is this. So, when you think of quantum entanglement, and there's sort of this philosophy in spirituality that some believe, right or wrong. I'm just anyway. There's this belief that if we want to attract something, right, that we have to sort of embody what that thing we're attempting to or want to attract is, right? So what is that feeling? What is that emotion? Because theoretically, if we're living in that emotion or that feeling of what it is to have that thing, right? And the quantum entanglement, and you apply that, with quantum entanglement, it's almost like mechanical that, okay, well, then the universe has no option but to react in such a way, right, that is aligned with the way that I'm feeling. And it makes sense when I think about that from, if you think about the source energy as being quantum, for example, right? So like, similar to when quantum entanglement, when you split the atom, right, and you send them in different directions. When one behaves in a certain way, the other one does this. The other part of the split atom moves in the same way, right? They both behave very similarly, even though they may be very distant apart from each other. So right. It's sort of that quantum connection, and so it makes sense to me when people like share that theory, this quantum theory, that whatever it is in your life, whatever that vibration is, whatever you're feeling is what you're going to attract, aka law of attraction. But one of the things that, and I won't say I struggle with, but I do, and maybe it's because of my Western civilization, sort of like maybe a religious/spiritual background, is like, it's hard for me to imagine source being so mechanical, because it's almost like a formula. And in fact, Alan Watts was always big about talking about laws and how they're basically a bunch of bullshit, but it just feels like it's so mechanical, and that it takes the love out of everything. It's like, oh, well, if I do this, the universe has no other option but to match my frequency, right? So if I'm up here, then the universe has to be up here with me too, and there's no other way. And if I'm kind of at the bottom, if I'm struggling and I'm down, like, that puts a lot of pressure on me, right? And it almost feels like, I don't know, I just feel like it takes the, like, we have love in our hearts, we love each other, and I feel like that has to come from somewhere. And that source energy has to be bigger than just this reactive quantum formula of how to attract things in your life. I mean, I'm rambling on here, Anne, but do you see where I'm going with this?
I totally see where you're going with this. So, okay. So let's look at what you said just a second ago. So let's say you're down, right? Let's say you're really glum and you're really down, but, someone might come along and say to you, okay, well, if you're really down and, where you want to be is really joyful, then just, fake it till you make it. Like, just slap a smile on your face and be joyful.
Right.
So you and I both know that is virtually impossible when you're in the throes of, let's say, being down. So I think where, and by the way, I completely agree with Alan Watts that, a lot of this stuff, a lot of the formulaic, so-called evidence that has sprung forth into, new age textbooks, and so forth. I think a lot of it is bullshit. Because I don't think there's a hard and fast formula to this universe. I think if there was, we would have figured it out a long time ago, and we wouldn't be, maybe as messy as we are. But so let's go back to the example of you're feeling glum. So there are a couple of ways to look at this. One way to look at this would be through the ego, and the ego would say, that's not good. I can't be glum. That is a lesser way to feel. That is, not as ideal as, let's say, joy. Well, an unconditionally loving universe, right? So remember, let's look at that word unconditional, meaning, we as human beings are totally, until we wake up completely, we are conditioned. In other words, when we run into a certain situation, let's say we run into an ex-boyfriend, and let's say the ex-boyfriend cheated on you and you had never gotten over it. And so, you're really triggered, and then you go home to your current spouse and you're looking at that spouse going, is he going to cheat on me? That is what is called a conditioned response, right? Mm-hmm. So an unconditioned universe, which is what we live in, right? We know that the universe is unconditional. That's actually part of the law of attraction. We emit a certain frequency, and the universe, without judgment, without conditioning, emits back and says, okay, so this is what we have here. Good. Here, right back at you. So in the example of someone being down, of someone feeling, unhappy, sad, let's say, an ego's response to that would be, I need to get out of this. So I need to reach for the higher feeling thought, or the higher feeling, which is, let's say, joy. Okay. But when we go to reach for it, of course, we can't because it's completely disingenuine. That's not where we're sitting. So here is the enlightened response to feeling down or to feeling glum. We behold ourselves feeling down, feeling sad, and we, without any conditions placed upon ourselves, say, okay, here we have sadness. And that's perfectly okay. I can completely accept this. Why? Because this is what's here. And to do anything else with what's here is insanity, right? So think about what might happen to someone who is in this sad space. So let's say the ego comes in. Let's say in the example of the ego, and the ego says, no, this is unacceptable. No, we need to change this. And now we've got shame. So now we're heaping shame on top of the sadness because we're saying, this isn't okay. This isn't acceptable. So now we've got sadness, and now we've got shame. And now we're working our asses off to try and reach for a feeling that we can't genuinely inhabit because it's not actually the feeling that's here. So now we're failures on top of it. So now we're sad, we're feeling shameful, and we're failing at reaching for the better feeling thought because all of the books right now say reach for the better feeling thought. That's going to get you out of the sadness.
Right.
Okay. So let's go over to the other one. So let's go over to the unconditioned or surrendered response. So we've got sadness, and we behold the sadness and we say, okay, here we have sadness. And you know what? I can absolutely love and honor myself within this sadness as much as I can love and honor myself in any other state of being, any other, because it's here for a reason. I can assume that everything is purposeful because we are indivisible from source. Therefore, we are purposeful, right? And so I am going to completely accept, embrace, and even love this sadness. So who do you think fares better? The one where the ego comes in and tries to snuff out the sadness, or the one where we completely say, this is okay. I embrace you. I love you. It's okay.
Yeah. And that even goes back to your story, right? That you were sharing about with your meditation, where, you were just feeling like you're out of options, right? I mean, it's not like you went into that meditation like, well, so here I am, and I know I feel like I'm up against the wall, but you know what? I'm not going to feel like that because I'm better than that, right? Like I'm spiritual. I have a big S on my cape.
That's right. No, it was, and you know, there's such a relief in the surrender and acceptance of what is at any given moment. And I've actually written quite a bit about this before, but you know, what happens when we fight, one of the things that happens when we fight against what is our nervous system goes pretty squirrely, right? Because we're literally in fight or flight. We're saying, no, this is not okay. I have to get rid of this. I have to, you know, let's use spiritual colloquialisms. I have to reach for the better feeling state of being. In other words, you know, how spiritual is this? In other words, what we're saying is the sadness is not okay, or the rage is not okay. How can it not be okay? Even if it's a conditioned response. Okay, so we're still dealing with trauma, let's say. So we have this conditioned response of rage, you know, to try and, you know, put the flames out of the rage and pretend that I'm blissful. I mean, I'm not sure if you've tried that, but it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. So when we go to complete acceptance and embrace and even surrender of, you know, whatever state of being that is, our nervous systems actually calm right down. And you know, Matt Kahn has actually talked about this quite a bit. So Matt Kahn is in Awake, a spiritual teacher. You can look at, you know, a number of his talks on YouTube. They're brilliant. They're lovely. And he often talks about, you know, the nervous system being a real sort of bridge to, you know, our spiritual freedom. Because if our nervous system is all wound up, it's going to be really hard, for example, to sit in meditation and get really zenned out. It's just not going to be possible under a lot of circumstances. But when our nervous system is really calm, we can access. We're just sort of more able to calm down enough to access, you know, some of those, you know, higher or lighter states of being. And we just feel better with a calmer nervous system. So we can take anything really that we're dealing with, and we can say okay to it. And sometimes that in and of itself changes the entire state of being that you're dealing with, paradoxically, ironically.
Yeah, it's powerful. And it almost reminds me too of like when you're trying to like not feel something you are. And I don't think kids these days play with this toy, but you remember that little, it was like this, it almost looked like a hot dog, but it was like it had water on the inside of it, and you'd squeeze the end and it would like fly out of your hand. And like, no matter like you could not hold on to it. Every time you squeezed one end or grabbed one end to hold it, would just fly out of your hand.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember this toy, but we used to play.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, but it, you know, like when you try and hold on to something too tight, right? Like
yes.
Like you just smother it instead of, and maybe that's a better analogy. But you know, like when you try and smother something, you know, it kills it, right? Like you end up. So you can't live your life smothering yourself. You have to open up, and you have to be okay with that and surrender to that. And when you do that, it's almost like love, right? Like you can't force love. You can't force someone to stay. You can't force someone else to be happy. And you also can't force yourself to feel a certain way. You just have to be. And but I do feel that there is a lot of this. And to your point, you know, it's connected to ego and the spiritual ego of you have to feel a certain way. And if you don't feel a certain way all the time, you're not ascended, you're not evolved. And it's so bogus, you know, because, you know, we're all, you know, if we are made of source energy, and that's what we are, then we're the universe experiencing itself. So, then how can we not be anything but perfect as we are?
Yes, you're exactly right. And of course, we're all evolving, right? So, to say that having, to be experiencing any one thing is not okay. Well, how can we know with absolute certainty that that's true? I would assume that because we're experiencing it, it's perfect for us. But we say, someone becomes ill with something, or, you lose a job, or, someone leaves you, that, your partner leaves you, let's say, or, whatever. And, we pound fists and stomp our feet, and we scream and yell, and we say something's gone terribly wrong here. And I would say that's not actually possible. I don't believe it's possible for anything to go terribly wrong. We are in an evolutionary process, and each one of us who is a spark of divine light is evolving in our own unique way and on our own unique path. So, it becomes really tricky when we start to compare our paths to someone else, and we look over to our spiritual buddy that lives, down the street, and we say, oh shit, he's having all of these awesome, cool experiences, and he's channeling, and, he attracted the love of his life to his life, and, all of these things. And then we look at ourselves and we're like, this is bullshit. What is going on here? I am not winning at life. And that of course is a hyper, egocentric way to look at it. But we do that, right? We do that. We look at the next person and we say, I really should be there, but that's absolutely impossible. And when we really get super duper honest with ourselves, and that's another really crucial aspect of all evolving spiritual paths, and certainly it's a crucial aspect to the surrendered path, is getting really what I would call radically honest with yourself. Because even if you were to look at, again, like, the guy down the road who is this, super spiritual person, if you were to ask yourself, would I really want to be doing, experiencing, what he is experiencing? It's really interesting. There's a really cool exercise that I do with myself that, I'll share with you, and your listeners. And that is having a visceral or felt experience of something that you're telling yourself that you really want, but then almost like using, a pendulum to see, is that actually true? Because if it's not here, so I'll give you an example. My husband and I tried for a really long time to have a baby, and, it took us 7 years, and I had to do in vitro, and, I finally got pregnant and I had a baby. And, about 2 years later, we said, okay, so, great. We've had our baby. It's time to have a second one. And I never really questioned that thought, do I want a second child? It was just sort of assumed, I looked around at all of my friends. All of my friends had at least, 2 children. And, I carried this belief, which I ended up cracking later, that in order to be a proper mother, I had to have more than one child. So, we went down the whole path again of trying to get pregnant, trying to have another kid. And, look, if there was anyone who, had all of the manifestation techniques down, I was doing them. And, kid number 2 never showed up. And when I looked back on that, when I looked back a few years after we had tried, and we had tried, doing egg donors, like, we really gave it the old college try. When I looked back on not having that second baby a few years later, when I really, really got deeply honest with myself, it wasn't actually what I wanted, because I felt so lucky and feel so lucky that I can be a mother of this beautiful little girl that I have, but still have an incredible amount of freedom to, play in this spiritual realm. And, maybe this is true and maybe it's not. However, if we had had another child, I would not have had near the freedom that I have. And I wouldn't be able to spend the time with my daughter and, learning from her, because she's a much more evolved soul than I am, and teaching her and learning from her and having this incredible, very, intimate relationship with her. If I had had another little one around. And so when I got really radically honest with myself, I could see the truth and I could see it immediately. And so that's another really super duper simple, it sounds so simple, but we delude ourselves a lot, thinking, we say, no, we must have this. We have to go down that path because look at the other guys. We're only proper if we do this or if we do that. But if you really, really check in and say, is that actually true for me? You will get a visceral response from your body. Your body will tell you immediately, before the question is out of your mouth, you will know the answer to that. And that's a really crucial component on any, spiritual and surrendered path.
Yeah, that's powerful. And that actually goes back to what, my question earlier about the mechanical universe, right? Because in the case of it being a mechanical universe, then you would have had that second child, right?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. So under that quantum entanglement theory, right? Like you would have had that second child, but that wasn't what you truly wanted, even though you were having all those genuine feelings, right? It wasn't deep down inside, not even what you truly wanted. Maybe it just wasn't even what you were truly supposed to have in this life. And the universe being, as you also well said, unconditionally loving you, maybe wasn't going to let you go down that path, right? Because that wasn't your path. This is the path that you're on. The path that you're on right now is the path that you're supposed to be. And so, part of manifesting, it sounds like, is sort of just surrendering your will to the universe and saying, I want what's in the greatest good for my soul, whatever that is. And I surrender what I think is best, and I open it up to you. And when I say you, meaning already what's inside of us and all around us, right? It's not, like you said, it's not separate, but I just surrender to the way. I surrender to the path. And that's what I want, is what's in my path or what's on my path.
That's absolutely right. That's really well said. We will always want what is, what I would call what is in the blueprint of, a given incarnation, a given path. Our most genuine desires emanate from that blueprint. But, we live in a big, huge world of contrast. And so we see all of these other blueprints being lit up and walked and manifested and experienced. And we say, but maybe I should want that, over there. And maybe my life would be a little bit better if I had that. However, again, it's so easy to, I mean, we complicate so much here. We really do. And, the one thing I realize more and more as, I sort of mature on this spiritual path is that it's actually so simple. We miss it. And so, what is in our blueprint, we know what's in our blueprint because it makes us, those are the things that make us come alive. Those are the things that, spark us. They amp us right up. It's like our veins are shot up with, this liquid sunlight, and we literally come alive under, the truth within our soul. And so, yes, as you said a minute ago, Adam, really I guess for lack of a better word, our job here is to surrender to the blueprint. And another word that I really like, because some people just do not like the word surrender. Another word that's probably just as apt is align. Align with the blueprint. They're really sort of the same thing, though.
Yeah. So then manifestation in a lot of ways, you have to do the work first, right? You have to, before you, and I guess we're always manifesting on the path, right? Because as we live, and we're following that path, then we sort of manifest as we go, because we're on the path that we're supposed to be on. But with that being said, at the same time, it's almost like we have to get to manifest what we want, or to manifest the things that are truly best for us, and consciously be aware that it's being manifested, I should say, because I assume we're always manifesting. We just don't realize we are, and it's not even that we're doing it, because that's ego. It's that the universe is manifesting it, and and when we start to recognize that things are manifesting as they should, it's because we are in tune with our soul, and because we are in line with our blueprint. And so maybe that whole concept of recognizing the manifestation just means being in alignment, and that allows us to see clearly. Is that a fair statement, or am I?
Absolutely. You use the word recognition, and I think that is such a key. Recognition itself is so key along the spiritual path. So it's simply to recognize what is already flowering, within you. And, it by no means does it mean living a passive life here. Not at all. Because as you've had many, many, many inspirations along the way, right? So to be inspired is literally means, in spirit. So the spirit within us speaks up. It shows up. It speaks up. And, I would say this is our blueprint being ignited in the moment. And when something within our blueprint gets ignited, there's nothing passive about that. That's sort of when the rubber hits the road. But when it's in alignment, we have the energy and the passion, and just sort of that singular mindedness in that moment to put one foot in front of the other and really, really go for it. Because, I've had moments in my life where I'm sure you have as well, where I've said, okay, I've got to do this. And, I get this idea, this is sort of like a mental or an intellectual construct. And I say, okay, I've got to do this, and this is great, and this is the way it's going to happen. And then I'm putting, very little effort into it. And I think, okay, well that's weird. Why this is such a great idea. Why aren't I doing this? And so, there might be a couple of things going on there. May not be your time yet. So you may have hit on a portion of your blueprint, but it just might be, the timing just might be off, or you're looking for love in all the wrong places, right? Like you're just hitting on something that, your ego might think is cool, but isn't necessarily for you. So when we can recognize our own blueprint, which again, we go back to simply getting really radically honest with ourselves. So we use our bodies like a little pendulum, and we know because our bodies either, strengthen up, and it's like that we power up. It's like, light bulbs, little sparks of light start, going off all over the places inside of our bodies when we align with something, or, very little happens, right? Very little happens. And so it's, telling ourselves, the truth as often as we can, getting very, very truthful, which is also a great relief, right? It's a great relief to know, when something is for us or versus something is not for us, because, we're all pretty busy people. We don't want to waste our time, working on something that is never going to be for us. I want to pour my time and energy into those things that, are going to unfold anyway, because I agreed to it before I came here.
Well, you know what, Anne? I think that's a fantastic note to end this episode of the podcast on. We've talked a lot. We talked about surrender. We talked about manifestation. We talked about some gray areas in between the two. It's such a complex and fascinating subject because, both surrender and manifestation take on many different forms. And so this was really enlightening, a really enlightening conversation for me. I feel like I've learned a ton from you, and this has been a pure pleasure speaking with you. So thank you, Anne, for your time to recording this episode.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back, Adam. It's always so fun to talk to you.
Yeah, it's always a blast. I'm sure we'll have you back again. And before we go, is there anything that you want to plug? How do people get a hold of you?
So people can find me on my website, which is www.soulfulsurrender.com. And I'm working on a couple of online courses that should be out in the spring of 2020. And one is going to be on mapping the blueprint of the soul. And the other one is going to be on helping women who have dealt with or are dealing with autoimmunity and finding relief through a soulful and spiritual path. So those are some things that are coming up, and I'm really excited about them.
Awesome. And we will have links to all of those things once Anne has them live on her podcast pages. So if you're listening to this episode and Anne has released those, keep checking up on our page and you should find it. And with that being said, until next time, friends, be well, take care of each other, and see you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the SpiritWoke Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to check out our website, spiritwoke.com, and connect with the SpiritWoke community on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just search SpiritWoke. Join us next time for another edition of the SpiritWoke Podcast. Namaste.